Far from the bustle of trade routes and coastal settlements, the Nordic landscape itself was believed to breathe with quiet life. Mountains were not merely stone. Forests were not merely trees. And the waters of the fjord were never considered empty. To those who lived beside them, these places held presence, memory, and spirit. As you drift tonight along the still waters, imagine how the Viking world may have appeared beneath the northern sky, not silent, but gently inhabited by unseen watchers. The land was sacred not because temples stood upon it, but because life itself seemed to dwell within every natural form. A lone boulder rising from the earth might be treated with quiet respect, its surface left untouched by tools or carving. Some stones were believed to mark places where unseen forces gathered, where the boundary between worlds softened. Travelers passing such landmarks would sometimes pause, placing a hand upon the cold surface before continuing on their way. Ancient trees, twisted by centuries of wind and snow, were thought to shelter hidden beings. Their roots sank deep into the soil, their branches reaching skyward like open hands. To cut such a tree without cause was avoided, not from superstition alone, but from a sense of balance. Life thrived when the land was honored. Even waterfalls, roaring in spring thaw, were approached with reverence. Travelers might leave offerings nearby, small carvings, fragments of bread, or simple metal tokens. Not grand sacrifices. Only gestures of thanks or quiet requests for safe passage. These acts were not driven by fear. They reflected coexistence. To live in the north required harmony with forces beyond control. Winter storms, shifting seas, sudden fog, and unseen energies believed to guide them. Many believed in landvetir, land spirits tied to specific places, guardians of valleys, forests, and fjords. Each stretch of coastline might have its own silent keeper. When ships approached unfamiliar shores, crews sometimes removed carved dragon heads from their prows. Not for decoration, but to avoid frightening the spirits of the land they entered. Respect ensured safe arrival. Disrespect invited uncertainty. Farms were built with similar care. Settlements avoided sacred ground. Paths curved around ancient stones rather than moving them. Certain groves remained untouched for generations. Quiet sanctuaries where animals moved freely and no tools were raised. Silence itself held spiritual weight. To sit beside a fjord at night, listening to water brush against rock and wind move through pine, was not considered emptiness. It was presence. The land speaking softly through sound and stillness. The northern lights, drifting across winter skies, deepened that sense of connection. Their slow movement was rarely dismissed as simple beauty. Some believed they were reflections of divine realms. Others saw them as cosmic pathways, or distant energies woven into fate itself. Tonight, as the aurora glides above your imagined fjord, you see it as they might have, not seeking explanation, only meaning. Animals too were viewed through spiritual lens. Ravens circling overhead. Wolves glimpsed at forest edges. Even the distant call of seabirds at night carried symbolic resonance. Encounters were rarely dismissed as chance. Meaning was drawn from presence. Yet Viking spirituality was fluid. There were no rigid boundaries between physical and spiritual realms. They existed side by side, like mist resting upon still water. And in moments of quiet reflection, that boundary felt thin. As your journey continues tonight, the fjord remains calm beneath the aurora's glow. Mountains stand in silent watch. Forests whisper in the wind. And somewhere within that vast northern stillness, The ancient spirits of land and water are imagined to remain, not distant, not demanding, simply present, as they have always been. While the land itself held spirit, the Viking world was also guided by gods, whose influence touched daily life in quiet and personal ways. Worship was rarely loud or theatrical. It was woven gently into routine, present without spectacle, spoken in calm voices beside hearth fires or beneath open sky. The gods were not distant figures removed from daily life. They were companions to it, shaping thought, guiding action, offering presence during both hardship and hope. Odin, often called the Allfather, was known not only as a god of war, but as a seeker of wisdom. He was associated with knowledge, poetry, wandering thought, and sacrifice in pursuit of understanding. Travelers, storytellers, and leaders alike felt connection to him, not through conquest, but through contemplation. A lone wanderer walking beneath stars might whisper a quiet acknowledgement to Odin, asking for clarity of mind rather than victory. Thor, protector of both gods and humans, was perhaps closer to everyday life. His hammer Mjolnir symbolized protection, stability, and strength against chaos. Many wore small hammer pendants, not as displays of devotion alone, but as comforts. Amulets resting against the chest, silent assurances during sea travel, storms, or uncertain journeys. Frey and Freya, associated with fertility, prosperity, and seasonal cycles, were honored during planting and harvest periods. Farmers spoke their names with hope for fertile soil, gentle rains, and abundant yield. Freyja also held ties to love and emotional bonds, her presence invoked in matters of family and unity. Worship did not always require temples. While sacred halls and wooden shrines existed, many acts of devotion took place outdoors. Offerings were simple. Bread placed upon stones. Ale poured into earth. Smoke rising from small fires lit in quiet groves. These gestures were not transactions. They were acknowledgements, expressions of gratitude rather than obligation. Seasonal festivals brought communities together in shared reverence. Blots or ritual feasts marked important transitions, midwinter, harvest, or times of communal need. Animals might be sacrificed in some gatherings, but even these acts were framed within respect and necessity rather than spectacle. Food was shared. Stories were spoken, and offerings given to ensure harmony between human and divine realms. You imagine such a gathering now, softened by sleep's perspective. Fires burn low rather than high. Voices remain gentle. Smoke rises slowly into a sky touched by aurora light. Not celebration in excess, but connection in calm. Spiritual awareness flowed through ordinary acts as well. A fisherman casting nets at dawn might whisper thanks to sea gods. A mother lighting hearth fires might speak quiet protection over her household. A ship captain departing harbor might pour ale into water before raising sail. These gestures required no audience. Faith existed comfortably in solitude. Sacred objects often rested within homes. Carved wooden figures placed upon shelves. Small altars beside hearth walls. Not dominating spaces, but accompanying them. Even tools could hold spiritual association. A well-forged blade, a carefully shaped plough, a seaworthy vessel, each seen as influenced by divine favor or guidance. The boundary between sacred and practical remained fluid. Night deepens along the fjord as these reflections continue. Across scattered settlements, candlelight flickers behind timber walls. Families rest. But here and there, small offerings remain beside doorways, beneath trees, near shoreline stones. quiet tokens left beneath the stars. The northern lights moved slowly above, their presence often linked to divine realms or cosmic bridges between worlds. Some believed they were reflections of Asgard itself. Others simply saw them as reminders of forces far beyond human reach. As you drift through this imagined night, worship feels less like ritual and more like companionship. The gods are not distant rulers. They are woven into wind, sea, harvest, and hearth. Spoken to softly, remembered quietly, honored through the simple continuity of life. And beneath the calm northern sky, devotion rests not in grandeur, but in presence, steady as the tide, enduring as the mountains that watch over the fjord. In the quiet spiritual landscape of the Viking Age, symbols carried meaning that extended far beyond decoration. Among the most enduring of these symbols were runes, carved marks that held language, memory, and intention within their angular forms. To modern eyes, runes may appear as letters alone. But to those who carved them, they were layered with presence, each stroke shaped not only to communicate, but to resonate. Runes were carved into wood, bone, antler, stone, and metal. They appeared on tools, jewelry, ships, and standing monuments scattered across the Nordic world. Their shapes were practical, designed for carving rather than ink writing, yet within that practicality grew deep symbolic association. A rune etched into a doorway might serve as quiet protection for the household within. One carved into a drinking horn could invite prosperity or safe gathering. Even small personal objects, knives, combs, pendants, sometimes bore runic marks tied to the owner's hopes or identity. The act of carving itself carried significance. It required focus, intention, and care. To carve a rune was not rushed. Each line was pressed deliberately into the material, often accompanied by spoken words or silent thought. In this way, the symbol became more than mark, it became imprint of will. Runestones stood as the most visible expression of runic culture. Large upright stones placed along roads, near bridges, or overlooking fjords. They marked journeys completed, lives remembered, alliances honored. Travelers passing these stones would sometimes pause, tracing the grooves with their fingers, reading aloud the names and deeds preserved within the rock. Firelight at night would cast long shadows across the carvings, making them seem almost alive, their lines flickering with each movement of flame. Some runes carried meanings widely recognized across regions. Symbols tied to protection, travel, strength, harvest, or guidance. Others were arranged into inscriptions telling brief stories, commemorations of voyages, family bonds, or acts of bravery. Yet runes were not used only for remembrance. They also appeared in quiet acts of divination. Small rune pieces, often carved from wood or bone, could be cast upon cloth or stone surfaces. Their arrangement interpreted by seers or thoughtful observers. This was not fortune-telling in dramatic form, but reflection. A way to seek insight, to pause and consider paths before choosing action. Interpretation relied on symbolism, intuition, and cultural understanding rather than rigid doctrine. Meaning was drawn gently, never forced. Runes also traveled. Carved objects moved along trade routes, carrying symbols between distant settlements. A pendant carved in one fjord might appear months later in another, its meaning crossing waters alongside its bearer. In this way, runes became both personal and communal, shared language beyond speech. Even ships bore runic presence. Carvings along hull beams, markings near rudders, protective symbols near prows. These were quiet assurances for safe passage through unpredictable seas. not commands to the gods, but invitations for guidance. Jewelry provided another canvas for symbolic expression. Hammer pendants, animal forms, knotwork, and runic scripts intertwined. Worn close to the body, these items offered emotional grounding as much as spiritual comfort. A trader crossing open waters, a farmer enduring winter, a traveler journeying alone. Each might carry symbols that reminded them of protection or belonging. At night, beneath firelight or aurora glow, these carvings took on deeper presence. Shadows moved through engraved lines. Metal surfaces caught flickering light. Symbols seemed to shift as flame danced nearby. This interplay between object and environment reinforced their perceived vitality. Runes were not inert. They lived within context, light, shadow, memory, and intention. You imagine now a quiet longhouse interior. A craftsman sits beside low fire, carefully carving a rune into a wooden amulet. Each cut measured, each line deliberate. Outside, the fjord rests beneath starlight. Inside, the symbol takes form slowly, meaning pressed into matter through patient hand. When finished, the amulet may be worn gifted, or placed within the home for protection. Its presence subtle, yet felt. Runes, like much of Viking spirituality, did not demand attention. They accompanied life quietly. Symbols resting beside tools, hanging near beds, standing along roads, whispering meaning to those who understood their forms. And as your journey drifts onward tonight, you can almost see their shapes glowing faintly in firelight and moonlight alike. Marks left behind, not only to communicate, but to endure, carrying intention across generations beneath the vast northern sky. In the spiritual life of the Viking Age, some individuals were believed to walk closer to the unseen than others. They were not rulers or warriors, but interpreters, listeners to what could not easily be heard. Among them were seers, often women known as voleurs, who traveled between settlements carrying knowledge shaped by ritual, intuition, and tradition. Their presence was treated with respect, but also with calm familiarity. They were not feared figures nor distant mystics. They were guides, invited during moments of uncertainty, transition, or quiet seeking. A volva might arrive at a settlement during winter months, when travel slowed and communities gathered indoors. She would be offered a seat of honor, furs for warmth, food from shared stores. Her role was not to command fate, but to glimpse its patterns. Rituals surrounding seers were ceremonial yet gentle in pace. They carried staffs, symbolic tools rather than instruments of power. Cloaks decorated with beads or small tokens rested upon their shoulders. Chants were spoken softly, rhythmic rather than dramatic. These sounds were believed to open perception, allowing insight to rise through trance-like reflection. But fate itself, known as wide, was not viewed as fixed destiny. It was more fluid, a weaving of past action, present choice, and unseen influence. Like threads crossing upon a loom, forming patterns not always visible until distance revealed their shape. Dreams were considered one of the clearest windows into this woven reality. A vivid dream might be shared openly the following morning. Families and elders would listen carefully, not dismissing the imagery, but reflecting upon it together. Animals appearing in dreams, journeys across water, storms gathering in the sky, each symbol carried layered interpretation. A raven might signal guidance, a broken ship warning, a rising sun renewal. These meanings were not rigid. They shifted based on context, personal experience, and cultural understanding. Dream interpretation was less prediction, more contemplation. a way to pause to consider one's path before walking it further. You imagine a winter longhouse where sleepers stir slowly at dawn. Fire embers glow faintly. One voice begins to recount a dream, soft, reflective. Others listen without interruption. No urgency to explain, only to understand. Fate in this worldview did not remove personal responsibility. It coexisted with it. Honor, courage, and decision still shaped outcomes. But unseen currents were believed to influence direction, like winds guiding ships beyond visible horizon. Seers sometimes used symbolic tools alongside dream interpretation. Carved objects, woven cloths, or small rune pieces arranged in patterns. These methods were not rigid systems, but aids to reflection. Ways to focus thought, to allow insight to surface. The process remained calm, introspective, patient. Night itself was often considered a liminal space, a boundary between worlds. When waking thought quieted, dreams could rise more clearly. And in the still hours before dawn, many believed the veil between seen and unseen softened. As your imagined fjord rests beneath star and aurora light, consider households where sleepers drift through layered dreams, their minds traveling beyond the boundaries of the waking shore. Some dreams would be forgotten by morning. Others would linger, guiding decisions, journeys, or caution in the days ahead. Seers did not claim to control these visions, only to interpret their echoes, to sit beside the woven threads of fate, observing how they crossed and curved. And as the night deepens further, the longhouses grow quiet once more. Dreams unfold unseen. Fate continues its patient weaving. And beneath the vast northern sky, reflection rests gently between sleep and waking, where meaning moves softly through the stillness of the Viking night. As darkness settles fully across the fjord, the spiritual life of the Viking world often softened into its most gentle form. Not through ritual alone, but through storytelling. Inside longhouses, fires burned low within stone hearths. Flames no longer roared for warmth or cooking, but glowed steadily, casting slow, flickering light along timber walls. Shadows moved softly across carved beams. Outside, the night remained vast and still. Inside, voices gathered in quiet reflection. Stories were shared not as spectacle, but as inheritance. Myths passed carefully from elder to child, from traveler to host, from one winter to the next. They spoke of gods walking hidden paths, of cosmic trees binding realms, of distant halls where ancestors rested. But these tales were not delivered with urgency or drama. They were spoken slowly, shaped by repetition, softened by familiarity. Children listened beneath fur blankets. Travelers leaned against wooden pillars. Hands warmed beside the embers while voices moved gently through the room. Storytelling served many purposes. It preserved memory. It explained the unknown. And it comforted those who lived within a landscape, both beautiful and unforgiving. Through stories, the unseen world felt closer, but never overwhelming. Night rituals often blended quietly into these moments. A candle lit near a doorway for protection. A carved charm placed beside a bed. A whispered word of thanks spoken before sleep. No grand ceremony accompanied these acts. They were personal gestures, small acknowledgments of forces believed to move beyond sight. As the evening deepened, even storytelling slowed. Voices softened. Pauses lengthened between sentences. Some listeners drifted into sleep before tales reached their endings. The fire itself seemed to understand this rhythm. Flames lowered, settling into glowing coals. Sparks rose occasionally through the hearth smoke, vanishing into shadowed rafters above. Outside, the fjord mirrored the same descent into stillness. Ships rocked gently at their moorings. Water brushed softly against dock posts. The northern lights drifted slowly overhead, pale ribbons, moving without sound. Within longhouses, sleepers settled beneath furs. Dreams began their quiet unfolding, and the stories spoken earlier of gods, spirits, and cosmic paths lingered gently at the edges of sleep. Not vivid, not demanding, simply present, like embers glowing after flame. You imagine yourself there now, seated beside the fading fire, listening not to words but to the quiet between them. The warmth of the hearth easing into calm. The fjord beyond resting beneath starlight. And somewhere between story and silence, wakefulness and dream, the spiritual world of the Viking night settles into its most peaceful form. The fire dims. Voices fade. And beneath aurora-lit skies, both myth and memory drift softly into rest.